Welcome everyone, Costin here with Total War Warhammer 3. In this video I want to talk about the best and most powerful factions to play in Warhammer 3 as a new player. I was motivated to make this video when you see this little message, recommended for a first campaign, and you see it as the Empire, Cafe, and the High Elves. Now, I happen to disagree with Creative Assembly in respect to this. Because for the Empire they have Karl Franz, for Cafe they have Miao Ying, and for the High Elves they have Tyrion. It does feel like what they wanted to do is have at least a faction from each of the games, Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2, or Warhammer 3, to recommend to new players, but I feel like they kind of messed it up with respect to that. If you're a completely new player, the last thing you want to do is play as the Empire in Immortal Empires. The reason for it is that Karl Franz and Gelt have certain mechanics, the Imperial Authority mechanic and the situation in the Empire to deal with. Basically, they have a mechanic where they have to deal with the Empire as a whole. And by that I mean if the Empire loses territory, if factions get wiped out in the Empire, they suffer in terms of Imperial Authority, which affects them greatly in terms of the faction. Okay, so these two, because of that, are out. Like, if you're an experienced player, yeah, there's nothing wrong with playing these, but there are certainly some problems the way Creative Assembly has implemented that so far in Immortal Empire. Some tweaks are necessary. Pretty decent factions, don't get me wrong, but not something you would throw at a new player. What about Marcus Wolfhard or Volkmar, both of which, by the way, are DLC factions, so you do need DLC to be able to play these. Well, Marcus has some complicated campaign mechanics that you need to deal with, so I would say for a new player he's completely out of the running. And for Volkmar, well, he is here in the Southlands, in the South region, where there's a large number of legendary lords all vying for power. Not exactly the cauldron of battle where you want to throw a new player in. So this decision with the Empire is a bad one. Like, if you're thinking about the Warhammer 1 faction that you would give to a new player, I'd say the Greenskins is probably your best choice because they're simple to play, they're pretty powerful right now, and they have a lot to offer, especially certain legendary lords. Then for Warhammer 2, there's the High Elves. Actually, nothing wrong with this decision. Tyrion is a pretty solid lord. He's not the best, but his faction, he starts in a safe location. He has a pretty solid army. He doesn't have complicated campaign mechanics to deal with. None of the Elven factions really do. So he is a good choice. Like, if you want to follow any of these recommendations, like the Warhammer 2 choice of the High Elves is actually a pretty good one. And then for Warhammer 3, they chose Grand Cafe. Now, to be honest, I kind of understand why they chose Grand Cafe for Warhammer 3, because the Warhammer 3 are either default factions, not DLC, but the Warhammer 3 default factions are either Cafe, Kislev, or the Demon factions. And between the Demons, Kislev, and Cafe, yeah, I have to say Cafe is probably the best choice out of all of them if you're a new player. And keep in mind, if you're a new... if you've only got Warhammer 3, I think you're only gonna have like Cafe, Kislev, and the Demon faction. So Cafe is probably the best choice out of all of them, just because Kislev can be a genuine misery, though they can also be pretty powerful if you're playing Castalton or more likely Boris Ursus. I've shown that in a video, like how powerful Boris can be in a campaign. Katrin is absolutely off the table though. But here's the thing about Cafe. They do have to deal with the caravan system, they do have to deal with the yin and yang harmony system, so that is complications you do have to contend with. And throwing a new player into that can be a bit of an issue. And out of these two legendary lords, I would say Miao Ying is actually considerably more difficult to deal with than her brother, who is Xiao Ming. Now, he doesn't have the same faction benefits, right? He doesn't have this 50% missile infantry unit upkeep reduction, which is pretty important, nor the 20% ammo for all armies. That is fair, absolutely, especially because in this game you kind of want to mass ranged units. Like, if you're a new player watching this, going with a massive range units is better than either a balanced army, though a balanced army does work fairly well, or a melee heavy army. Like if you have ranged unit options, good ranged unit options, not skirmishers for instance, but like actual archers, crossbowmen, gunpowder units, then you generally want to stack as many of them as possible, and Meowing does certainly benefit from it. However, she literally has a massive wall, the Great Wall of Cathay, basically the Great Bastion to defend. She's got quite a few enemies to deal with, and she has to balance out defending that bastion with also expanding. So she's got to complicate the situation. I'd say her brother, although he doesn't have the same benefits, her brother is in a substantially better situation, because he has a significant diplomatic bonus through his skill tree with the ogres who are to his west, so his western flank is going to be secure, so he can expand east. He can take pretty much all of the territory of Cathay very quickly. Again, he won't have the same ranged power, true, but he is he's got such a solid position that he will do generally much better than his sister. But honestly, outside of the High Elves, none of these factions are ones that I would recommend. So which ones would I recommend? And that's what I'm going to talk about. The top 5 best legendary lords and factions to play as a new player. I'm going to pick one legendary lord from each faction that I feel should be on the list, and the best legendary lord from each faction that I want to include on this list. Some honorable mentions, though, that don't make this list, but are lords worth looking into if you do gain some experience, you have a decent amount of experience, because those legendary lords are actually really powerful, though they can be a bit of an issue for new players to deal with. So for the legendary lords that could be recommended if you have more experience, Grom the Paunch is easily the best greenskin legendary lord in the entire game. The reason is he has an incredible benefit with his cauldron, which gives him faction-wide buffs that are very substantial. Those benefits are going to be far, far greater than anything else Grimgor, Azag, Skarsnik, or Warzag can offer you as a faction. And you can change them dependent on the situation. But here's the problem. Although Grom is absolutely really powerful, he starts in Bretonnia. And the issue with that, he's surrounded by, I don't know, a dozen or a dozen and a half factions, all of which, and I do mean pretty much all of them, without exception, want to go to war against them. Why do they want to go to war against him? Well, if you become a really powerful faction, they will see you as a threat, far more likely to declare war against you. The issue for Grom is that he's surrounded. He doesn't have like a single border to defend. He has to defend himself from all sides. He can gain quite a bit of territory, but then he's going to be facing the hordes of enemies, Wood Elves, Empire, Bretonnia, Skaven, all coming for him in his territory. Potentially even the High Elves, because Wolf One is actually pretty close to his position, though that's obviously by design, because he has a rivalry with the Lord of Everest, the guy who holds Eastern Ulf-1. So that's one honorable mention. If you're a pre-experienced player, you can do wonders with Grom, far more so than any other Greenskin lord, and I would say he's probably one of the best lords in general in the game right now. But for a fresh new player, I would not recommend it. Too many enemies, too many things that can go wrong, too many armies that are going to descend on you. Then another honorable mention is for the Beastmen. Yes, I don't have these free. I never bought the original DLC pack. But an honorable mention really has to go Tarax. Tarax the Brass Bull. Now, Tarax is King Steamroller, and the Beastmen aren't necessarily very complicated to play. They don't have to pay upkeep for units. They don't have to pay for units in general. And they have incredibly powerful settlements. Like, rather, they only have like Hearthstone as their only settlement. But here's the thing. That Hearthstone is a great settlement type to have for the simple reason that the AI, even on Legendary, the AI will not be so eager to attack it. I mean, they will, but even if they do attack it, it's going to take substantial military forces for the AI to take it. So you do always have that safe haven. And on top of that, like, the Beastmen have free units. they can expand very quickly, and Taurak's far faster than anyone else. This is a guy that can paint the entire map. Now, what's the issue with him? Because there are issues. Well, the Beastmen do have limitations. They do have unit caps on their faction. Now, you unlock them later on in the campaign, but the problem is his start and the Beastman start is something really for an experienced player, not a completely new one, because you're basically going to rely on pretty crap units at the start, like pretty crappy archers as the mainstay of your army, the Ungor Raiders. Now, it can work, don't get me wrong, and using the speed that Taurak works at, you can certainly make a lot of things work, but you will probably have to fight a lot of battles, and things can go badly if you are playing as him. The melee units that you have, like, there are only 2 units they can recruit in infinite quality, like the Spearmen herd and the Ungor Raiders, and the issue, and the Spearmen are useless to use, so you're pretty much down to Ungor Raiders spamming them. This is actually what the AI does as well. It's not just something like you do as a player. Like, the AI will get a lot of these guys in their armies early on. Though there is a reason why the Beastmen factions are pretty much a joke on the map unless you're playing them. If you're playing them, they have a lot of things going for them, but you also need to be careful. So an honorable mention for a faction that is really strong, but you do need to know what you're doing in order to make it work. So with that said, let's actually look at the 5 factions, 5 legendary lords that I've picked for new players to play in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires as things stand right now in the beta. At number 5, we have the Sisters of Twilight of the Wood Elves. Now, the Sisters are their own DLC pack. You don't need to get the Wood Elf pack to buy them, though you can also buy the Wood Elf pack. It was either going to be the Swiss Sisters of Twilight or Orion. Maybe Drycha would get an honorable mention, but I do think the Sisters are probably one of your best choices. But why the Wood Elves? So let's actually start with that. Well, the Wood Elves are really a ranged faction that focuses on having very few settlements and gaining quite a bit of money from those settlements. You don't need to worry about massive expansion across the map, though you may be fighting across the map as the Wood Elves, but you don't have to worry about massive expansion across the map. But let's start with their armies. Their basic unit, their most basic unit, one of their most basic unit, is the Glade Guard. The Glade Guard is an incredibly solid ranged unit from the very beginning. Like, very solid ranged unit. Doesn't necessarily do the highest possible damage, but as a tier 1 unit, I think it's hard to argue that these guys are easily the best or one of the best units that you can get at tier 1 as a unit in the game. And then you can upgrade them. You can get Starfire Shafts that gives them armor piercing, or you can get Hag Bane Tips, but you can upgrade these guys, and eventually you will replace them with Way Watchers as the mainstay of your ranged army. Now, having a ranged army, a really powerful ranged army, can really turn a lot of battles around. Now, Warhammer Total War actually has been for quite a few number of years really unfriendly towards melee. That has changed with Warhammer 3, but it cannot be denied. On an open field battle, ranged typically tends to dominate, unless the enemy has either magic or units that are too strong to be defeated by ranged units. These kind of ranged units. However, for most of the game, for most of the early mid-game, this kind of army, or an army stacked with Glade Guard, is going to be incredibly difficult to defeat. Actually, fighting the Wood Elves yourself is something of an issue because the ranged power that they have is incredible. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about Wood Elves. Although they have a weakness because of this focus on ranged units, specifically in siege battles, not minor settlement battles, like proper walled city battles can be an issue. Like in smaller settlement battles, you just park your units outside of the zone and you snipe the enemy. Even if you don't do it in a single go, fight it to a draw or retreat, come back again, do it again, wipe the enemy out. No problem. No problem there. But walled cities, a ranged focused army can be an issue. But that's the thing about the Wood Elves. They aren't just a range-focused army. They have some very powerful melee units as well that are part of their arsenal, like dancers, for instance. Blade dancers as well can be really good. Or trees. You can get tree spirits like tree kin or tree men, among other things. And those are incredibly powerful melee units. So you have an army that's not really just good in range, but it's also an army that later on, many of their late game units are actually melee units, and they're pretty amazing to play with. Treekin in particular are something that I dread to fight on the campaign. Why is that? Because they're heavily armored melee units that are really, really hard to take down if you're focused on a lot of range. So not only do the Wood Elves have an incredibly powerful ranged army, they also have a good counter to a powerful ranged army with the Tree Men and the Tree Kin, which they can go for. In fact, there's an entire faction focused on tree spirits, or rather two. There's Durfo, and then there's Drycha. Drycha being somewhere around here, over here in the Griffin Wood. So there are options over there from a military perspective. Now, economy-wise or campaign style-wise, you have these various trees. Like if you're playing the Sisters, for instance, which I've chosen to do, you'll start here. Now, your goal with these trees is to fill up this bar. You fill up this bar by raising these settlements, repopulating, or just capturing them, raising them, either way. But you capture or raise, or raise then capture these. Like you can get a benefit, and then this helps fill the meter. Once the meter is filled, you do a ritual. That ritual will give you bonuses to your faction, like abundant growth, so growth, control. And so this is a very defensive-oriented campaign. You're not going to expand in a massive empire. Rather, what you're going to be focused on is the nearby surroundings that are tied to the forest. Because you need to hold these regions, or an ally needs to hold these regions in order for the forest to heal, and so you can do the ritual. Now, of course, there's a catch in this. There will be random armies, or rogue armies rather, spawning at certain locations, but they're not really much of an issue to deal with. Because you can intercept them before they spawn. You can go there, take them out before they become really powerful. Once you're doing the ritual, you're going to have like 3 armies spawning or multiple armies spawning that you are going to have to deal with and destroy before they become an issue and try and take down the tree. And then you do this on your initial tree, and then you can teleport. You can teleport using the deep roots, and you can teleport to any of these minor trees or smaller trees around the map, or even to the big tree, the Oak of Ages, which is here between the Empire and Bretonnia. But you can fight pretty much across the map. That's, by the way, great for a campaign. Oh, you want to fight against Cafe? Go. Sure. Go to Cafe. Oh, you want to go into the Southlands Thunderdome? Go to the Southlands Thunderdome. You want to go in the north? You want to go to the east? You have ways of doing so. You can teleport, take some settlements, help the local wood elves that hold the region, or if they've lost the region, retake it for yourself, and then fight in that area if you so decide to do so. You also can confederate easily with a lot of other factions. Like for instance here, these smaller trees, they don't have their own regeneration, but they are fully functional settlements. The Wood Elves don't have a lot of settlements, like not big ones. Any region that's not a tree is just gonna have like one structure, and just some benefits like growth or construction costs or control, but minor benefits, not income. But these trees, these free trees here, whichever faction you're playing of the Wood Elves, you will have control of the Oak of Ages, and you'll be able to upgrade it for various benefits that it provides, like control, growth, etc. But these minor trees, each of them was controlled by Wood Elven faction. But what I did certain quests for them, confederate them, and now I have these trees. Now, if there is a downside when it comes to the Wood Elves, is that they don't have necessarily the best economy, and their economic building, which are here, do cost growth. So you need to use population surplus, you need to get population surplus to build it, to get these buildings in the first place, and then to grow them. Their economy isn't necessarily the very best that you can have. Like, for instance, here I only have 2 armies, but each individual army is a powerhouse in of itself. You won't swarm your enemies with numbers, you'll swarm them with high quality troops that can do very, very well against them. The economy, again, is not necessarily there to support that, but it is an okay economy, and the fact that it is largely based on just having single settlements means that you don't have to deal with issues of raiding. Taking one of these trees is something that's rarely going to happen. The AI doesn't like to attack heavily fortified settlements. Rather, what AI generally does on every difficulty is that they tend to go for weaker targets. Well, you don't have any weak targets. You don't have any single settlement that AI can easily take down. So because of that situation, you're pretty much unbeatable. Like, it's very hard to lose a campaign as the Wood Elves. It is a slower campaign because it does take time to regrow the trees, so to speak. So you are going to be spending a lot of time. Like, for instance, here I've only regenerated one tree and it's already turned 40. Some other campaigns may have already won by this particular stage. Although I could have probably regenerated 2 trees, but instead I decided to focus on confederating these factions at the Oak of Ages, get an extra army because if I got these smaller trees, I got the income. Though I've only recently managed to get all of these smaller trees, and they do still need some population growth. For whatever reason, I didn't have these economic buildings. They had a bunch of military buildings, so I had to destroy those. Yeah, the Wood Elves, slow and steady, if you will, an unbeatable faction when it comes to battles, even if they are heavily outnumbered. The one issue is, of course, ammunition with their troops. Like, being a ranged focused army does mean that ammunition can become an issue. You don't want to get your army cornered with no means of escape. If you end up in that situation, you may very well lose. Then they also have heroes that buff their ranged capability. So this fellow right here, this Waystalker, he has an increase to base missile damage for all allies around him. Then there's Ariel with the DLC that the sisters are associated with. Ariel is an incredibly powerful caster, very useful to have.
Remain calm.
And the question you might have, why the sisters? Like, it makes sense to play Wood Elves. It makes sense to have them on this list, but why the Wood Elves? Well, it comes to a number of reasons. First off, faction benefits. So the sisters themselves have 10% ammunition for all armies. Since you're playing a range-focused faction, that extra 10% ammo is incredibly potent. Orion has more missile strength, for instance. Orion would be my second choice, but I'd say 10% ammunition is probably a bit more important than 10% missile damage, though it is a balancing act. Another reason why the sisters is they have some incredibly powerful benefits for Hawk Riders. Now, I don't really have Hawk Riders, I just have the 2 that I started, though you could go for a Hawk Rider Doomstack from the very beginning, from very early on, because you do have a building here in the Witchwood that will allow you to recruit them. And they're pretty solid units all around. They're not terrible. Like, they're flying ranged units. They can do quite a bit of damage with the sisters in particular. If you're wondering, by the way, why I'm not using their dragon mount, well, they have a dragon mount over here. So they have a dragon mount or they have an eagle mount. I think the eagle is, like, the dragon gives them a lot more durability, especially if you're going to be going melee, though you can summon it separately and just have the sisters do their thing from ranged if you so decide. But beyond that, the sisters themselves do have some pretty solid benefits, though Lord benefits, considering the fact that you can confederate pretty quickly, that wouldn't really matter that much, but you do have some pretty solid Lord benefits for the sisters. So they have minus 15% upkeep for missile units. That's a really solid bonus in its own right. Melee attack charge bonus for flying units, so they really make that flying Doomstack work. But then on top of that, skill wise, they have campaign movement range, growth, control, post-battle loot, you're going to be destroying settlements and you're going to raise them for income, for a lot of money. Money is going to be an issue if you're playing the Wood Elves. So the sisters do better in that respect right off the bat. And most crucially, they have the Forge of Death. The Forge of Death is, well, it takes a while. You get these points over here with the Forge. You get them at regular intervals, and then you can use these points. You can get up to 3, and then you can use these points to craft items. Some choices that might stick out to you: the Dreaming Boots, the Perfected Dreaming Boots, which you can actually make into Reforge for 5 turns. But these offer you campaign movement range, and this is something you can get for free, by the way. It's like you don't have to spend any currency, and you don't have to worry about it. Like when you get points for it, you just come here and you get whatever item you want, or you can get a buff for your entire faction if you so desire. But yeah, you do have various choices over here, like Campaign Line Style, Missile Strength, Dreaming Ring, Sisters of Twilight, like plenty of choices available for you. Control, if you so desire. Personally, I do prefer having the Dreaming Cloak for the upkeep benefit, as well as the Dreaming Boots, because they are incredible. But you do have other choices as well. If you want to go for like casualty replenishment, post-battle loot. I just got that to level 1, though I'm probably going to upgrade it to get it to level 3, because post-battle loot is pretty useful. So the sisters overall, they're part of a faction that is incredible on the battlefield. Not necessarily the strongest in terms of economy, but they do have a great deal of safety, and they don't have to worry about, like, you don't have to worry too much about what's going on around the world. The world can burn, and you can finish your campaign just fine as long as you hold the key settlements next to your trees and expand there. And you can always choose to go to a region. Oh, you don't like a region? Okay, no problem. Let's go with the deep roots. Get the hell out of here. Teleport our army. Go to another safer place. Expand there. If it just doesn't work out, you have flexibility. You have flexibility of going around the entire map. You have a faction that has a lot of power behind it, and it's not hard to play. It's not hard to play them in battle or campaign. In the campaign, because you don't have that many settlements, so it's less complicated to deal with. Nor is it hard to play them in battle because, well, range power. That's the basic game plan. Though you can go with the melee army if you so desire. Now, in number 4, we have Norsca with Throgg, the Troll King. Norsca is a pretty solid enough faction, though they are a melee-focused faction with monsters as well. And they are pretty strong in melee, though they do have some decent enough ranged units with their hunters as well. But mainly they're going to be a melee-oriented faction with monsters as well. So infantry, monsters, that combination. You can get things like Norscan Ice Trolls, Finniers, Skin Wolves, and so on. So you get werewolves, you get trolls, you get some pretty cool monsters, and you have a lot of power at your disposal. But really, what sets Norsca apart is not its army roster. There are plenty of dime a dozen melee-focused factions in this. There's the demon factions, there's the Warriors of Chaos. That's not really what makes Norsca so really potent. Rather, it's the way the faction works. Economy-wise, if we look at the situation, we get these buildings, the Beast Tamer. They do generate a pretty decent amount of income. Every single faction does have these. But Norsca also benefits from raising settlements, sacking settlements, to get favor with the gods, Nurgle, Slanesh, Tzeentch, Khorne. So if you raise a settlement, you can dedicate it to a particular god, like the Serpent's Favor, the Hound's Favor, etc. So you do have choices over here to who you raise. So you can go on an adventure with your armies across the sea to raise settlements. But what makes Norsca so really good is how they interact with other factions. If you're playing a Norscan faction and you kill the leader, the faction leader of another Norscan faction, you can confederate with them. instantly, no repercussions, which is a pretty major benefit compared to some other factions. So if I were to take out the scaling leader who is over here, I would confederate with them. Though at this point with the scalings, they really are down to just that one army, because I've taken the remainder of their territory. But this is turn 36, and I've gotten so far, on Legendary, I've gotten so far largely through confederation. So like, you start here, you'll fight an army that's led by the faction leader of one of the minor Norscan factions, you take him out, you gain this entire province of the Mountains of Hell. And that's turn 1. Then you have the dwarves of Krakadrak over here that are going to fall very easily. After that, sure, you could go south, deal with Kislev and other things, or you could go west, and that's exactly what I've done here. I've gone west, and by doing that, I've confederated pretty much every other Norscan faction, except like some vassals over here that are dependent on the Warriors of Chaos. But by and large, the Norscan factions within what you'd consider Norsca have been confederated by me fairly easily and fairly quickly. So I have a good economy, a large amount of territory. Having this amount of territory on turn 36 is actually something very few other factions can achieve, unless we're thinking of perhaps Scarbrand as an example, who can just keep going from battle to battle, or maybe when we're thinking about Arx, or Valkia. But outside of that, getting this amount of territory so quickly, under your direct control, not vassals or something like that, is something very few other factions can do, or no other faction can really do. I've even confederated with Wulfric the Wanderer, so I have him as a lord in my army. So he's going to so he's already providing his lord benefits, his skill tree, etc. So he's already there. He's about to fight there for Castle Alexandranov. Now another factor that comes into play with Norsca is what they're actually dealing with at the start of the game. Because what does Norsca have to deal with as a threat? Well, it's Kislev mainly. And that mainly comes down to Katrin, who's still alive here in Kislev, and Kostaltin. Beyond that, many of the other factions that are nearby are either going to be friendly or indifferent. So for instance, here I'm allies with both Clan Mulder and the Ecstatic Legion, so Azazel, the champion of Slaanesh, they're both my allies. I have gotten myself into a war with Demon Prince and Nagrand and Hagrif earlier on, though the Demon Prince doesn't have much for this world because he's just down to a very limited amount of territory over here. Like, I think this is the only region that they have. Hagrif, after I defeated Malice Darkblade in a battle, he's also been largely neutralized. So there's no real threat to the north, unless maybe Sigvald decides that he wants to have a piece of me. Who knows, maybe he does decide that, which allows you to concentrate on the south. But here's the thing about the south. The Empire has major issues to deal with. They've got Festus here, who starts in the Brass Keep. He's going to do a lot of damage to their territory and keep them occupied. There's also Beastmen. There's also Orcs, though apparently Marienburg has wiped out the Orcs. But the only threat that you may face if you go west is Bretonnia. And Bretonnia, well, when it comes down to it, Bretonnia, compared to the full-on rage of Norsca, is just not going to be able to stand up to the fight. Besides, Bretonnia has its own issues. They've got the Broken Axe, they've got an Orc infestation in their region. They've got a lot of problems. By adding Grom the Paunch here in Bretonnia and adding Festus in the Empire, those two factions are going to be occupied with that, leaving you to be able to really neutralize the threat of Kislev and take all of this territory very quickly without too many issues. They're a relatively simple faction to play when it comes down to it. Their economy is pretty simple, just a couple of buildings. It's very easy to expand due to the way that it works, because the leaders of factions are generally going to be in charge of their most powerful army. So so if you end up in a war with them, they're likely going to be the ones coming for you, right there to be served on a platter. Go after them, kill them, take take their entire faction in a single go. Now, why is Throgg the choice here and not Wulfric? Well, I think it comes down to, from my perspective, it comes down to his initial position. Wulfric starts over in the west, Throgg starts here in the east. Now, I've moved Throgg to the west to deal with Wulfric, to deal with Be'lakor as well. I've killed Be'lakor over there. It was actually a pretty interesting situation because I kind of ended up in a somewhat alliance with Bretonnia where I was fighting side by side against Be'lakor with them. That was a fun situation. But I really think it comes down to faction effect and starting position. So, Throgg starts here. He can take down Krakadrach, so he can eliminate the dwarves, get this cultist camp with gems, which gives you diplomatic relations with Norsca, though that's not really going to be too much of an issue. But you eliminate Krakadrach, and then you're able to help Azazel and Clan Mulder, who are more or less capable of fighting Kislev to a standstill on their own. Like, the issue Kislev has in their own campaign is not the fact that they just have Azazel or Frat done clean to deal with, but that very quickly after those guys, Throgg is going to show up with his stacks of troops after dealing doors. Like, he takes this entire region turn 1, he takes Krakadrach in 4 or 5 turns or so, and that's what the AI does. You can do that as well as a player and not really face too much opposition either. And that gives you a fairly significant advantage. So right now, as I'm looking at this, there's no real threat to me on the campaign except maybe Bretonnia. And Bretonnia is only really going to threat on Albion, and I can always just raise an army over here in Bretonnia, in Albion, raise an army, start recruiting some troops, do global recruitment. I have such a strong enough economy that I can do global recruitment, get trolls, get Norskans, Norscan Ice Wolves, or get Skin Wolves, get Marauder Spearmen, and just get the full army, keep them occupied while I either ravage the Empire or deal with Kislev or send Throgg. Like, so many choices, so many ways to expand, and it's very easy. Like, at this point, I'm so powerful that I'm ahead of the vast majority of AI factions. I'm number 1 in terms of strength ranking, and I haven't had any serious threats to deal with. I mean, Kislev's tried to put up a fight, but at the end of the day, raw numbers between Mulder, Azazel, and my own armies, there's no chance for either Kostaltin or Katrin to be able to put up a fight there. And hell, this Norscan faction here to the east, which I could take control of very easily if I found their faction leader, if I so desire, because I don't actually have any diplomatic relations with them. If I took these guys out, you know, I would have this entire, I would have all of their territories as well, allowing me to push on multiple fronts at the same time. So positioning is important, and also there's another factor that comes into play as well. Throgg has, as a faction, if you play him, you get upkeep benefits for Norscan trolls and ice trolls. What does Wulfric get? He gets a mammoth benefit if you play with him. Now, mammoths are good, don't get me wrong on that. They're a really solid unit, but they're a tier 4, tier 5 unit. And in a Total War game, the early game is actually generally far more important than the late game. He does get an upkeep benefit for Marauders, but that's really it. Between these two, I'm going to put my money on Throgg being the better legendary lord. Start positioning feels better, like just getting this entire province. Although Wulfric can certainly get the entire provinces as well fairly quickly. Though I would argue that that the provinces he can get are not necessarily as good as the ones that Throgg can get. Like, Throgg is not significantly better than Wulfric, but he's just that much, slightly a bit better, that I would say it makes a difference. Besides, he also starts with trolls in his army, and I would argue that is a fairly substantial benefit for a legendary lord, especially when you are buffing trolls. So yeah, Norsca, pretty solid faction, pretty straightforward faction, with some banded benefits if you do care about it. But you don't have to care about it. You don't have to care about the gods or anything like that. All you need to really do is wipe out the Great Orthodoxy, Ice Court, basically wipe out Kislev, more or less. Wipe out Kislev and, well, that's about it. And then you can worry about allegiance with one of the gods. Defeat all the other challengers that do arise against you, all that, to get your long victory achieved. So you start out strong, you get the steamroller going, and then you do have the luxury to do whatever the hell you want. And that kind of without being really pressured by anyone, because while you're running around amok and without anyone really able to stop you, the other factions are busy with their own concerns, with their own issues. They already have enemies to deal with. This is one of the problems when you're dealing with Norsca. This is actually what makes Norsca so dangerous when you're fighting against them. Because if you're starting as an empire, you have a dozen different threats to deal with. One of the obvious ones is Festus, the Leech Lord. If you're starting as Kislev, you have Clan Mulder and Azazel to deal with. Norsca just comes as the second wave, so to speak, and they have no direct challengers, unless you are counting perhaps the Demon Prince. But the thing about the Demon Prince and Hag Grief is that they're going to generally fight each other pretty quickly, though they've apparently agreed to a peace agreement. So you don't have any genuine challengers for a very long time in your campaign, and that gives you a significant benefit. You have freedom, flexibility, a strong enough economy, the ability to expand very quickly, very efficiently across a large region of the map without any real opposition in your way. And that makes for a hell of a faction that gets strong really quickly and then becomes unstoppable. Like at this point, I have an army here that I could use against Bretonnia. I have another army here to push against Kislev. So I have two armies, and then I have a third force, well, that I was using mainly as a garrison, but I can send that either way I want. And then I can build a fourth army as well to deal with various other issues. Oh, and then there's Surfa. Then there's Surfa, who taught Hag Grief and the Demon Prince some manners after they decide to be an issue to me. So it's like I've got two full armies, two other semi-full armies or almost full armies that I can get up to full, though not necessarily with the very best units. And it's like there's no one that can contest me. There's no one that can stop me, and it's such a breeze to get through. Like your trolls, your units, your monster units in general are just gonna tear through enemy armies, and then you can serve things like Marauder Berserkers or Marauder Champions, and things do start getting very quickly out of hand in your favor, very quickly, very easily, without too much effort. So yeah, Throgg or even Wulfric, really, regardless of what you want to play, like Norsca is just a really powerful faction. Both their legendary lords are pretty solid, and their campaign is generally a very easy one. Like Legend of Total War, pretty famous Total War YouTuber, he played the campaign as Throgg, and then he stopped it. His reasoning is like it was just too easy. People didn't like to watch him play through that when he's just demolishing the entire map. So yeah, that's what you get when you're playing as Norsca. Certainly a number 4. Why not higher, you might ask? Well, because the factions that are higher on this list have even better positions. And number 3, it's one of the strong and steady factions of Warhammer 2. It is the High Elves. The one thing Creative Assembly did get right is recommending Tyrion of the High Elves as a beginner campaign in Warhammer 3. They got it wrong with the Empire and Cafe, I feel, but they certainly got it right with the High Elves and with Tyrion in particular. Why Tyrion? Let me just answer that very quickly, because there's not much of a complicated answer that needs to be said there. Well, Tyrion is a very strong melee lord, right? He's very solid in melee. He's got either strong faction benefits here in his tree here, or he can go with the bloodline of an Aryan and increase his own weapon strength, so he can become even more of a monster while fighting. And he already is a monster. He can also pick up the Sword of Cain, something that I'm actually working on towards right now, though this is certainly going to take some time to be able to get done. If I had this entire province, maybe it would be faster, but I only have this particular region. Public order and growth are going to be some issues over there, so it is going to take a certain amount of time. But okay. So why, and with Tyrion, it isn't his strengths as a lord, it's his position. He starts in Lothern. And Lothern is a very safe region in the campaign. Like, if we look at the map, if I toggle the Fog of War using a mod for it, the only threat that's even remotely close by to you is Noctilus in the Galleon Graveyard. And suffice it to say, compared to the myriad of other threats that you can face as numerous lords, just having to deal with one major faction that can potentially pose a threat to you, though not really, because Lothern has got a fairly solid garrison, does give you a major advantage. I mean, Alarielle also starts in Ulthuan, and she does also have a fairly strong and steady position as well. So you could also play Alarielle if you so desire, though Alarielle is a bit more annoying in some way. Like, I would say, like, as a faction, she has the possibility of becoming stronger, especially since she can confederate pretty quickly with other factions here. But the one annoying thing as Alarielle is that you do need to maintain full control of Ulthuan, or the Elves need to control Ulthuan, or else she gets penalties, though she does have bonuses if you do control Ulthuan, like the Elves are doing right here. This is turn 28 that we've got full control of Ulthuan. There is a rebel, or rather there is a Dark Elf faction that you started war with here in Athene, that controls most of the regions here. You deal with them. You pretty much dealt with any real threat to you. Once you deal with them, you can take Safri. They don't particularly like you, so yeah, High Elves killing High Elves. And after that, you've got flexibility. Come here, deal with Nakari very quickly, who starts over here, deal with the Dark Elves that are in the north, and that's Ulthuan liberated. And then, well, march on whoever you want. Like, you want to go to Lustria? Go to Lustria. You want and deal with Marathi and Malekith. You want to go in Bretonia and the Empire? You can do so, though obviously the climate is not necessarily favorable to you over there. Though you can, it isn't too bad. So you have a very strong base of operations that's fairly secure. Now, it is still a lot of provinces and territory, and potentially people can come from Lustria or the Empire of Bretonia to mess your day. But if you control all of Ulthuan over the vast majority of Ulthuan, you are certainly going to be able to maintain multiple armies to deal with any situation, any problem that comes your way. Your victory conditions as well as, like, outside, you do need to go after Nagrand, and you do need to go after Marathi. So you are forced down a specific line over there. Although someone might wipe out Malekith before it becomes too much of an issue over here. Or I could just take all my armies and march north and deal with him myself. It is some distance that you do have to travel to deal with both him and Marathi, but you do certainly have the capability of doing so. So the position that Tyrion has is really good. Like, as opposed to a Lifanar who starts over here and has to fight all of these Dark Elves. Like, if you want a more hardcore High Elven faction, yeah, play a Lifanar. Though he's not as good as Tyrion from my perspective, like either fighting. What about Tori of Rest? You could reasonably play as Tori of Rest, sure. Or as Alarielle, as I've mentioned. Both of them work. Tori of Rest might actually be better in some ways because they do get the Mistwalker units. But the thing is, if you do start a Tori of Rest campaign, the issue you're going to encounter is that you don't actually start in Tori of Rest with your lord. You start over here on a ship in the Badlands. Now, the AI doesn't, like, next to the settlement. Now, the AI doesn't have that situation, or at least I haven't seen it, I haven't checked necessarily. The AI will focus on securing Tor of Rest, so Northern of Rest, Southern of Rest. You could reasonably do that as well, but really the campaign there is more so designed around the idea that you are going to go on a crusade against orcs, which is what the Elfari and the Grim ended up doing. Now, the Elves, army-wise, they're a fairly solid mix of infantry, ranged units, monsters. Like, they've got flexibility with their army rosters. They're pretty solid. They're a fairly well-rounded army in almost every respect.
How can I assist you?
They're not the ranged powerhouses of the Wood Elves, but they are certainly capable of giving them a run for their money. And crucially, they do have siege equipment, even if it is limited to just one unit type that I don't actually even have right now in any army in terms of the Eagle Claws, because you don't start with any, and getting the building can, well, there are other priorities rather than getting siege with all the minor settlement battles that are. Now, the Elves play in a fairly straightforward manner. You do have a regular economy, you don't have any complicated faction mechanics to deal with, nothing too crazy. The only thing you really have in terms of faction mechanics is the influence system. So influence is a resource that you gain for certain actions, doing certain, having certain events pop up, using a buff on your faction, like for instance the Vacation of Asuryan, having certain structures, etc, etc, etc. And influence can allow you to manipulate factions in terms of like liking you or disliking each other. That's how the influence system works. It like allows you to mess up with other factions diplomatically, if you so desire. It's also used, you also need it for certain events that may come up or you may spend influence. Also, you need it for the really good lords and heroes that you can recruit. So influence is just gives you that benefit. Like for instance, with 40 influence, I can recruit a noble that has the excellent trait. So he would have 1 control for all provinces, 5 control for a local province, 5% income from entertainment buildings. Like that's the thing. Like high elves really can go crazy. And they've actually been nerfed compared to Warhammer 2. They used to be even crazier. Tyrion in Warhammer 2 used to consistently become one of the strongest, if not the strongest factions on the campaign map, just because he doesn't have any real threat to him, and so he's able to expand expand greatly on his own without any real opposition. He was a cornerstone of the Order time. Yeah, the faction works pretty in a very straightforward fashion. You do have this line of buildings here that give you control, and if you get 100 control, you do gain extra benefits. So for instance here, it's generating 60 extra income because I have control of 100 in my original province. And then I have the industrial buildings for elven trinkets that are also generating extra income. And so the elves, like you expand with the elves, you get that economy going, you get your control up, you become a economic and military powerhouse that is fairly well-rounded, capable of responding to pretty much every threat. There is no enemy faction, there's no situation where an elf army will be at a significant disadvantage, except potentially with very high armor targets, because if you're reliant on your ranged units, because your ranged units don't necessarily have the greatest armor piercing in the world. So that is one issue. You don't really have the same armor piercing as, say, the Dark Elves have on their ranged units, or the Dwarves. But you do have other ways of making up with that. You also have bloody dragons late game, so, and powerful magic. Just a fairly solid, well-rounded army that has pretty much everything that you need. Except, I guess, ranged pierce units. And even then, you do have the Sisters of Avaloron, who are probably going to make up your doom stacks towards the end of the game, who are those armor-piercing range units, though they are a later game unit that can be fairly expensive to recruit. But yeah, Tyrion, solid melee lord, really good position, solid army, solid economy, benefits from the influence system, because in the trading system, when elves trade with someone, they do get to see, they do get vision on
do you wish the ladies
on a faction. So for instance, I'm trading with Bretonia here and I have vision on them because of that. So you know what your allies or your trading partners are doing, what they're dealing with, and you can react to those threats in a timely manner. So a great faction overall. Like the elves in general are a great faction. Tyrion is just the safest bet if you're playing a high elf faction, just because of his positioning. Like, you might end up having to fight elves early on. If there's any tip I would say is like taking out Safari, taking out Calador over here. which start as independent factions that don't really like you, taking them out really quickly, and then some other factions as well might be to your benefit, taking their territory, conquering it, setting up a shop over there, and then yeah, you can maintain like 3 full stacks by turn 28. Now, basic units in all of these armies, but these basic units, it's not the powerhouse of the Wood Elves in an individual army, but these armies, but there's 3 full armies over here that are fairly solid in their own right, quite capable of dealing with pretty much any enemy that they would encounter in this relatively early stage of the campaign. It's quite easy to get this territory, quite easy to hold it, and you're not really going to face major problems along the way. So yeah, Tyrion, rank free, High Elves rank free. Not necessarily, you could play other lords, like you could play Tor of Rest and just abandon the Badlands invasion plan, get your hero back and just play an Ulfuan Tor of Rest campaign, or you could play a Alariel. Those are choices that are also fairly viable. But there's something to be said about Tyrion, who does have the Great Warrior trait, his own personal benefit as a lord, where he gains minus 50% upkeep on spearmen, rangers, archers, silver helms. Since archers are going to make so much of your early game army, and so will spearmen, it is a really good benefit to have in your faction. A really solid army. High Elven armies are actually really good for this game plan with spearmen and archers combined action. Or go for the Archer Doomstack if you so desire. Like, that was really popular in Warhammer 2, though melee has been buffed in comparison. It's quite a lot more viable, and ranged has been nerfed in comparison to that. Now, at number 2 is the one who would consider himself the best, but is only the second best. It's Grimgor, Ironhide of the Greenskins. Now, Greenskins are an incredible faction, and they're fairly easy to understand. They have piles of shiny stuff that generate a good amount of income that upgrades very quickly. Their economy is not hard to understand, it's not hard to get a hold of, and they also live via raiding and sacking settlements. So you gain an enormous amount of gold from sacking settlements. Now, Grimgor isn't the best legendary lord for the Greenskins. I would certainly say Grom the Paunch has him beat, because Grom the Paunch has better faction benefits than Grimgor does. However, Grom the Paunch starts surrounded by enemies, all of which will want a piece of him. So not really the best campaign if you're a new player. If you're an experienced player, oh yeah, you will dominate the map as Grom the Paunch fairly easily without any real problems. But if you're a new player and you want to pick up a faction that's pretty direct, pretty easy, pretty strong, you can't do wrong with the Greenskins. Even with no DLC. That's the thing. As opposed to so many other factions that require some DLC or another, or are DLCs themselves, they are a baseline faction for Warhammer 1 that is currently amazing with no DLC whatsoever. Like, if you do have the DLC, far better, sure, certainly some very strong options over there. But the Greenskins work very direct. Like, their armies, not necessarily something, their early game armies, not necessarily something to write home about, though, although they're goblin archers, especially upgraded with scrap, because each Greenskin unit can be upgraded with scrap. You get some research that unlocks it, like for instance here, Sharper Stabbas in the research tree very quickly, and you get scrap, you get it as a resource fighting battles, and you can upgrade them for either heavy ammo or ammo capacity. So for instance here I have increased I've given them armor piercing, though both of them could work, depends on the situation. So Greenskins fairly direct in the way their economy works, in the way their diplomacy works. You don't have to worry about trade, because you can't trade. You don't have to worry about necessarily being nice, although you can certainly bribe enemies to leave you the hell alone while you worry with things. And they also have the same confederation mechanic as Norsca does. Like what Creative Assembly did in Warhammer 2 with the Grom the Paunch DLC, is they took the Norsca confederation mechanic where if you kill the faction leader, you can confederate with the other faction. And that's something they added to the Greenskins. in Warhammer 2 with the Grom the Punch DLC. But you don't need the Grom the Punch DLC to have access to that, or the faction rework. So that's one of the things to be said. So you can take a huge amount of territory by just killing the enemy lord and gain their armies, the lords, all that very quickly. You don't necessarily always want to do it because there is a downside in terms of control and relations with other greenskins, but you do certainly have a fairly strong you have a fairly strong army faction, and you can expand pretty quickly as well. Then there's the Wa mechanic itself. So when you call the Wa, and I'm just going to demonstrate it here, you select the target. So for here, for instance, here I am at war with the ogres, and you call the Wa. You have to fill up this meter by fighting various factions, and this meter itself gives you benefits: growth, control, recruitment costs. And then you call the Wa, either missile strength or weapon strength. And then what the Wa will do is that each individual army that you have will get another army associated with it. So for instance, this army has 19 troops. They're going to get 19 troops as well. You can control these or let the AI control them if you don't want to bother with them. These units are for free. They don't cost upkeep. So when you call a Wa, you don't just have one army or two armies bearing down on the enemy. And Greenskin armies are pretty decent. They're not the best. There are factions that do have better units than they do. But what they lack perhaps in quality, especially the early game units like goblins and the like, what they lack in quality, they more than make up for in raw numbers. Because hey, look, there's this this enemy army that's over here. Although I'm not necessarily certain I'll be able to beat them. Actually, I will. Full stack of ogres. This army should beat the crap out of this army, but because, you know, I get a couple extra units and I get the benefit of the Wa, no problem. To be fair, it's also the various upgrades that I do have faction-wide and the army upgrades that Lord has at his disposal that really push that over the edge. Now, that's the Greenskins themselves, right? Standard recruitment, very easy economy to understand, decent enough growth. You just get this growth building, the idols. You have really good control for the boss's tent. Like the boss tent gives you 4 control at its lowest level, and you can upgrade it all the way to 10 control. You're not going to have public order issues as the Greenskins, that's a damn certain. The rebellions, what the hell are those? It doesn't matter. You could have the most chaos-infested hellhole imaginable, and you could still keep control of it if you had some boss's tents. Fairly easy to understand, fairly easy to play. But the question is, why Grimgor? Why not Grom? Well, Grom because he starts surrounded by enemies. But okay, what about Warzag, for instance, or Azag? Well, okay, Warzag is fairly strong as well. Probably stronger than Grimgor on an individual level. But he starts a war with... He's going to be fighting the dwarves, and he has some really nasty issues as well to the south. He's got some fairly hostile factions next to him that he may have to deal with as well. Okay, what about Skarsnik? Well, Skarsnik is strong, but, well, I think the results speak for himself. He's been reduced to one single province here. The problem for Skarsnik is that he really needs to take care of Gate Peaks. He starts at the pretty decent enough level distance from it. It wouldn't necessarily be the hardest thing in the world to retake it for him. But yeah, it would be a bit complicated because you do need to avoid the dwarves, so not Skarsnik. What about Azag? Well, he's sandwiched between Kislev, though Kislev certainly has another its own issues, but he's got the dwarves, the vampires, Kislev all around him, so not really the most recommended one. Hey, if you want to fight 3 legendary lords from the very start, go right ahead. You will certainly get that as Azag from very early on. Or you could play as Grimgor. Who does Grimgor fight? Other Greenskins and ogres. That's it. And he's more powerful than either of them. He starts here in Saber Mountain. He starts a war with the faction of orcs, he easily crumps them. To the west, he has more orcs that he can have really good relations with. Like, so for instance, with this faction, I'm in a defensive alliance with them. With this faction, with the faction of orcs that starts in Zorn Skull, I did actually fight a war with them, killed their leader, got them confederated, dealt with some attacks from the vampire counts here in the Silver Pinnacle, but nothing too much, not too much of an issue to deal with. And that was really about it. The only major threat that you will face as Grimgor for probably the entire campaign, and only early on, is from Kolic, the Sun Eater. He starts near the challenge zone. He's not particularly friendly, though you could potentially bribe him to at least leave you the hell alone. Kolic doesn't necessarily have an incentive. Like, if you're playing as Kolic, you don't want to touch Grimgor. If you're playing as Grimgor, you may want to kill him. I certainly did, or you can bribe him. He just refused in this particular campaign. Legendary AI bias, like the AI on legendary difficulty, and all the campaigns I've shown so far, to be very clear on this, all the campaigns have been on legendary difficulty. Every single one of them. This campaign, with legendary and very hard battle difficulty, I haven't had to manually fight a single battle in this campaign so far. A single battle. That's not to say I've won every battle. I've lost some settlement battles. Kolic did some damage here in this region in the Path to the East when he invaded me. But outside of that, it's like I've been crumping foes left and right without any real effort on the highest difficulty of the game. The Wa army, the Wa ability certainly plays a role. Wa lasts for 20 turns. For 20 turns, every single one of your army is going to have an extra army associated to it. Now, there are downsides if you fail the Wa, but you want that Wa to last for a very, very long time, because it does make you a genuine powerhouse. That Wa ability makes you a genuine powerhouse as a faction that can't easily be stopped. And Grimgor, in particular, because he starts in such an isolated position where he only has one, and I mean this seriously, one potential major threat, is incredibly strong because of that. He doesn't necessarily have the strongest faction benefits, although he does get the benefit to Black Orcs, so he gets campaign movement range, upkeep to Black Orcs and big guns. His Was can contain Black Orcs, so he does have a fairly decent army, though I'd say Grom the Punch easily has him beat in terms of raw power. But what he may lack in raw power, he more than makes up for the fact that he is on his own. No one is going to kill him. No one except Kolic is even going to try to kill you. And by the time you reach the Goldtooth, well, you don't necessarily need to fight the Goldtooth. You could potentially avoid fighting the ogres altogether if you so desire. Go to the west, go to the east, go to the north if you so desire. Though invading Chaos Wastelands is not necessarily the most recommended ideas, but it's a very orky thing, isn't it, to go after a major threat that you really should leave well enough alone. But yeah, you have a lot of flexibility. You don't have any real major threats. Your faction has 2 armies for the price of 1 when a Wa is active. And you're fighting a guy who is a genuine hero killer. That's one of the biggest advantages that Grimgor has compared to the other legendary lords on the Greenskin sides. In a fight, no one really kills enemy leaders the same way he does. In a 1v1 fight, Grimgor is a monster. And I haven't even gotten his axe or his armor over here, and he's still a monster. He starts as a monster. Kolic is probably better, but the thing is, you just bring a lot more numbers. Like, your first Wa might just be spent on Kolic, and it's like, oh yeah, nice army, Kolic. You have a lot of units. I'll bring 3-4 times as many units as you do. And that's the beauty of the Greenskins. That's the power of the Greenskins. That's why in a lot of campaigns since the rework, the Greenskins have dominated the Badlands battles compared to the Dwarves. Though not in every campaign. And certainly things are a bit different here. I think what's happened here, if you actually ask me, I think it's either been the Beastmen that have ravaged this region, or more likely, or far more likely, Skarbrand decided to pay a visit over there. That probably would explain the chaos corruption that these regions do have, like undivided chaos. Well, he would have corn corruption, so really, the Beastmen have done all that? A bit surprising, really, when you think about it. But yeah, if you're playing as Grimgor, you're not going to face any major foe for a very, very long time. And when you do, like even Kolic, he's not a turn 1 threat. He's like a turn 10, maybe even 20 threat, if he is a threat at all. And same with Goldtooth, same with Rhesus. And once they're gone, it's like, who's going to stop you? The western provinces of Cathay, you bring a lot more men. By the point you encounter Cathay, you'll be a heck of a lot stronger than they do. The key to playing the game, by the way, is to expand as quickly and as aggressively as possible. Though be careful about who you meet, because you don't want to necessarily expand in a direction where you're going to meet a lot of potential foes. But that's the beauty of playing Grimgor, his isolation. It's not going to last forever. We all know that the Chaos Dwarves are going to be coming, and they're likely going to start here to the west. But even with the Chaos Dwarves, that's what? 1 or 2 legendary lords that he's potentially going to have to deal with? He probably will have to deal with them, seeing as his relations with the Chaos Dwarves are, well, he was a slave to the Chaos Dwarves. So once they get that in, his situation is going to drastically change for the worse. Absolutely. But until that point, Grimgor remains not the best, but the second best legendary lord to play, especially if you're a new player in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires.
The Everchosen comes to stop the final ritual.
Do not meddle in my destiny!
Finally, and number 1 as easily the strongest faction in the game by far at the moment, the Warriors of Chaos, Archaon the Everchosen. Not only is he one of the best factions to play as a new player, but he is one of the best legendary lords, and his faction is one of the best to play currently. If I hadn't chosen to make this list with different legendary lords from different factions, all of the choices so far would have been different choices of the Warriors of Chaos, with Archaon still at the top. If this was a top 10 list, 8 of those spots would be taken by all of the lords from the Warriors of Chaos. But why is that? What makes the Warriors of Chaos so incredibly powerful ever since the rework that came with Immortal Empires and the Champions of Chaos DLC? Well, first off, it is recruitment. So you have warband recruitment. And recruitment in general for the Warriors of Chaos is instant, global, and also gives you full strength units. No matter where you are, you can recruit units at full strength. Now, you won't be able to recruit all the best units wherever you want to be, and there are going to be limitations. For instance, some of the most common units you can see will be Marauders, Gas Warhounds, and Marauder Horsemen. Here in this region, which I do control, I do also have Aspiring Champions and Forsaken. And if I go to my city over here, my Dark Fortress, I can get more buildings to get local recruitment like Chaos Knights and Chaos Warriors. Though you can't just get chosen. To get chosen, you need to upgrade. That's the second part of recruitment. So you take a unit, it may start a Marauder, it may start as Chaos Warrior, it doesn't matter, and then you can upgrade it with certain research. You do need certain technologies to be able to do it. And then you can go all the way to Aspiring Champions. So generally, I think a lot of people will just be satisfied with Chosen. So that's one way to recruit. That's part of the recruitment. That's not all of it. But understand this. Global instant recruitment of up to an entire stack of units is incredibly potent beyond any means you might understand. And then there's specializations for the various Chaos Gods that you can go for. So for instance, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Khorne, Slaanesh, dependent on who you're playing. The dedicated Champions of Chaos for these gods can only go for like Khorne, Slaanesh, Nurgle, or Tzeentch. Like Valkia can only go for Khorne units or undivided units. But as Archaon, you have access to everything because Archaon is undivided chaos. That's one of the things, by the way, that makes him strong. Like him and Kolic in particular, and Be'lakor are undivided chaos, so they have access to all of it. They're not as good in their particular, in the specializations as, like, say, corn, as Valka would be with corn units, but you do have the flexibility, which is pretty great. So that's the first aspect that needs to be brought up over here. The recruitment is incredibly strong. Now you do need to upgrade your units, but the upgrades also happen instantly. You just need a certain amount of experience. For instance, with these trolls, or with these trolls, I just need to get them to rank 3 to make them armored trolls, which are just going to be better in every single way possible. Now, it isn't for every unit, and you can specialize them with various marks, though you gotta be aware of certain limitations. For instance, with the Chaos Warriors, you want to make them chosen. Either chosen of Nurgle with great weapons, or regular chosen. Both are really good. The one limiting factor here is how your armies work with regards to undivided authority. So with authority, so you have authority, you have undivided authority and authority for every single god. Now this will depend on research, on characters, what kind of characters. Since I have an exalted hero that's undivided and Archaon is undivided as well, I have a lot of undivided authority. Authority will reduce upkeep, improve casualty replenishment, reduce recruitment costs. You pretty much want to specialize armies around either undivided or a specific god. You don't necessarily want to mix and match too much because you will lose the upkeep benefit. But that's one portion of the recruitment. Then you have gifted units. Gifted units for Chaos are units you gain, also global recruit, though you need to be in a friendly region to be able to do it. But as long as you have a settlement, like let's say you go to a region, you take a settlement, you occupy it, and you can then get access to the gifted units. The way you get access to gifted units is through the Gifts of Chaos. Now, the Gifts of Chaos have various benefits. For instance, here I have missile resistance and tribute from vassals 100%, on allegiance points 100%. But there are various things. One of those things is units that get added to the global gifted pool. So at the start, you only start with Chaos Furies, but you can make it, if you spend souls, you can get things like Dragon Ogre Shoggoths, Chaos War Shrine, and Hell Cannons. Actually, Hell Cannons are pretty accessible. The one limiting factor with gifted units is you can only have 6 per army, so no more than 6 Dragon Ogre Shoggoths or Skull Cannons or Hell Cannons per army. There is not going to be a Soul Grinder, Doomstack, or anything like that over here. You're mainly going to rely on chosen units, as well as potentially cavalry over here, like Doom Knights of Tzeentch, or Chaos Knights in general. Like, for instance, you can go Chaos Knights. So with Chaos Knights, you kind of want to specialize them. I think Skull Crushers are really a good unit. Though for an undivided army, you likely would want to have Dragon Ogres and Dragon Ogre Shoggoths in your army. Okay, so that's the army aspect. In itself, it is incredibly powerful because it means you can react pretty quickly to what your enemies are doing. So say, for instance, let's say I had an army coming here to the Crystal Spires. I'm not prepared for it. Okay, what do I do? If I had the money, I don't right now because I've spent a lot, but I could just come here and get a bunch of Marauder units right away and deal with that situation. The second thing that makes Warriors of Chaos right now incredibly powerful are the way their settlements work. So you have things like called Dark Fortresses. Any settlement that isn't the Dark Fortress that you occupy is just going to have 1 slot. But Dark Fortresses are full-on 8-slot settlements. Now, Dark Fortresses at level 1 can get raid trophies, which generate 400 favor income, 400 income at level 1. And this can be upgraded, obviously, as you go more and more. So post-battle loot, faction-wide, income from sacking settlements, which stacks, right? 2% goes all the way to 4% per treasure house. So at level 4, you're getting 1,000 from this, and I'm already level 3 at turn 27. Also, there's also the Chaos Shrine, which gives me at level 1 30% favor from all buildings, at level 5 50%. So the income just keeps popping up, and there are potentially other benefits as well. There's some other structure that I believe, like for instance the Monstrous Den, which can give me things like Dragon Ogres and Chaos Giants for local recruitment, or the Horse Barn. So you have those options in the Chaos Fortress. Now, one of the benefits I've talked about with the Wood Elves earlier was the fact that they only have a couple of settlements, and those settlements are very strongly defended. However, Wood Elves, or Beastmen for that matter, which can also be a fairly strong faction, they only have large garrisons, but they don't have walls. You have walls. You have strong defenses, strong garrisons. Chaos Warriors are nothing to sneeze at. They're very durable units. Taking a Dark Fortress is a nightmare because the units of Chaos are not going to fall very easily. They have a lot of leadership. They have a lot of potential in fights. They can last for a very, very long time. And so while that's happening, while these units are keeping your units occupied, or enemy units occupied, your towers or the enemy towers are going to rain down death. So any Chaos Fortress is something that you would require, that an AI, if we're talking about the AI doesn't really have a chance to take a Dark Fortress unless it has like two full stacks, two stack armies. Against the garrison, just to be clear on this, against the garrison, and not necessarily the garrison of a level 5 Dark Fortress, or the garrison of a Dark Fortress that has an extra garrison from the armor tower. No, I'm talking here the baseline garrison of like a level 3 or level 4, even level 2 for Dark Fortress is incredible. So each Dark Fortress, this one is generating 1800 income. The other one that I have in Zanbaijin is 1200, and these two over here are 800. So that's an enormous amount of income. From my vassals, I'm barely getting anything, really, only 600. From the Dark Fortresses, I'm getting almost 5,000 from that. So that's a significant portion of my income. Now, if there is any downside, is that if you only have one Dark Fortress, and these can be spread out pretty far away, and not every region will have them. If you only have like one or two, you're obviously going to be far more limited. But get a couple of these, and you start becoming a powerhouse. And every Chaos faction, minus potentially Festus, if we look at the map, but even he has a Dark Fortress in Middenheim that he can take pretty quickly, so he can get up to 2. But he probably has one of the hardest starts of any Chaos faction. But even so, considering all the benefits that Warriors of Chaos, like if you want to just join in the thick of the fighting, Festus is certainly going to work for you. Though he probably has the hardest starts of all the Chaos Warriors, but it doesn't matter. It genuinely doesn't matter how hard his start is. Because although he doesn't have the income from the buildings, he's certainly going to make up for it with sacking and raiding. And he can always go north, colonize get some vassals over here. Like he can always just hop on a ship, head north, take all of these fortresses. There's 4 dark fortresses here in Norsca that he could potentially go for. So there are options. Now, that's the Warriors of Chaos. That's what makes them so incredibly powerful, regardless of which Chaos Lord, which Legendary Lord you decide to pick. What makes Archaon the powerhouse of the Warriors of Chaos? Well, it's his faction benefits and his position. One of the things that's mattered so far on this list is position, position, position. Where you start has a major impact in the strength of your faction, especially early on. Get that good start, you steamroll the campaign. Have a hard start, it's going to take a lot longer. This is where Archaon shines compared to everyone else. He starts here at the right wing fortress. He starts right outside of it, he takes it turn 1, he vassalizes these fellows. Now, let's look at this situation just from a geographic position. He has one Dark Fortress here. One region away, just cross one region, and you get another one. This Dark Fortress is held by these fellows, the Magathkin, who are also a prime target of vassalization, and Chaos does get the benefit from having vassals. Income benefit, having allied armies. So for instance, the Magathkin over here, they have almost an entire stack that they are sending across the world, and they'll probably only have like a stack of even that, but they can take territory. You can let them have the minor settlements. You don't want to give them Dark Fortresses, but that's a demon faction. So already within the first few turns, Archaon gets 2 Dark Fortresses, 2 vassals, and he has so many other options. Now he starts a war with the Slaanesh faction that starts in this region. I would have liked to have vassalized them, But in this case, they actually got wiped out by my own vassals. So you have Norsca, Nurgle, Slanesh, Khorne over here. Now, this Khorne faction in the Bloodfire Falls starts a war with Boris Ursus. Boris is the only threat you're going to face early on. Absolutely the only potential threat that you will face as Archaon on any difficulty. But it doesn't matter. He starts with only a small settlement. He doesn't. He has a pretty strong army, but he's not going to be able to recruit mountains of troops because his income is going to be limited. You bring a stack and a half, you beat the crap out of Boris. Especially if you can tackle him when he's in a settlement, so he can't use the power of his warbears and his ranged units in an open field battle where he might win. You easily wipe him out, take him out. Then you go to war against Khorne, because Khorne over here, again, one region separating this from another dark fortress. This one is held by Khorne. You take the Khorne guys out, you vassalize them, like you beat them back to their last settlement, you vassalize them, subjugate them, and you get, and right now, when we think about it, and this settlement here, if you take this fortress, you can then take this settlement and give it to another vassal. So within like 6 turns, if even that, you're looking at potential of 4 vassals, 3 dark fortresses, 5 if you vassalize the Slanesh faction, which you can absolutely within the first few turns. And then there's a faction with Tsinch here, which starts a war with the Demon Prince. So you're looking, and has their own dark fortress. So you're looking here at a campaign start, where you have 4 dark fortresses right next to each other and 6 factions that you can easily vassalize. Maybe 7 if you are so bold as to decide to go after the Demon Prince, though I wouldn't necessarily do so. In my case, with the Demon Prince, I've actually gotten a defensive alliance with him so far. Maybe I turn that into a full-blown alliance. Maybe it's better to have him as a full-blown ally. Maybe it's better to force him to force him to submit. There are some decisions. Generally, he goes to war at Hagref, but there's another dark fortress, and if we go west, 2 more, another one, so 2 more over there, 3 more. We go west and we go west a lot, like we're already in Valkia's territory. And you can certainly reach this point pretty quick, within a decent amount of time. But here's the real sweet part. There are 2 dark fortresses, much faster. One's held by a Skaven clan. I think you could potentially subjugate. The other one is held by no one, because it starts off as a ruined settlement. For whatever reason, a Tsinch faction gave the Pillars of Skulls to Grimgor. So I'm probably going to have to fight them for the sake of it, if I so desire, or I could just, I don't know, make an alliance with Grimgor. Alright, so the positioning that Archaon starts with, 6, 7, 8 vassals. Because if I take this fortress, these guys become my vassal, this tribe becomes my vassal. So that's 7 vassals within striking distance. 8 if I can vassalize the Skaven. I'm not entirely sure I can. I don't know if I can subjugate them or not. But either a 7 or 8 within striking distance of your start, and only thing that stands in your path is Boris, who has to deal with the weight of numbers, because he starts a war with the Khorne faction. He doesn't take them out that quickly. You take this Nurgle fortress out, you go after Boris, he's not going to stand much of a chance. He doesn't automatically declare war on you. Now, that's just the position aspect, but that's not the only thing that makes Archaon so incredibly powerful. There's more. There is how his faction actually functions. His benefits, his faction benefits. What does Archaon get? Let's read. Maximum 1 gift to Chaos Undivided. Okay, fair enough. That doesn't really matter. 10% research for each vassal faction. Again, you have 6, 7, 8 vassals very close to you within, like, say 20, 30 turns, give or take. 40, if you will. That's 80% research potentially that you can get if you keep these factions alive. You vassalize them, you subjugate them. There are some vassals you're going to gain when you take a region. There's some vassals you can revive by just taking a territory. So for instance, this vassal right here, the Tong don't exist at the start, but you just take one region here, and you just, after taking this Howling Citadel, you take one region, and you can create them and get them as a vassal. So 80% potentially, or let's say 50%. Right now I have 5 vassals, so I have 50% extra resource speed. But then, here's the real sweet part. Diplomatic relations plus 10 with Demons of Chaos, Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen, and Norsca for each vassalized faction. That's plus 50. Plus 50. To give you a notion here, these are my trading partners. These are my allies from the very start, like Legions of Chaos, Granaving Tribe, Clan Molder from the very start. And I could get more if I so desire, actually. Like I could get get diplomatic relations going with Azazel if I really wanted to. But I don't want to because I want to vassalize him. So I'm keeping my options open. But yeah, World Walkers, Wintertooth could certainly get that going. Plus 50 diplomatic relations. Like if we look at the situation here, ruler's tolerance, that's what it means. That's what it is. It's like that 50 extra. These factions are almost certainly never going to declare war against you, regardless of what you do. And then the final one, plus 25 souls, 4 from each vassal. So in my case, if I look over the souls, and it's not showing here, by the way. Actually, here is just showing the upkeep, but it's not showing how many I'm gaining from the vassals. Maybe they should update that, but I'm only really spending 25 souls per turn maintaining 2 Gifts of Chaos. If I get 10 vassals, I'll be 250. That's a lot. One of the problems as Warriors of Chaos is, one of the few issues that they do have, actually, is the souls upkeep. You don't necessarily need the souls upgrade. Like, your army is already a powerhouse. Your economy is already strong enough. But it's just that extra benefit that you get. Like, the one thing you'd probably do want to keep almost all the time is that one. Don't as necessarily, since there are some others as well, especially for Khorne, though I haven't unlocked anything yet. But yeah, you have Archaon start. A faction where you can literally start painting the map in your colors from the first few turns, where no one really opposes you, where no one's able to stand up to you. You are not a legendary lord when playing Archaon, you're the goddamn apocalypse, which is appropriate considering the end times. There is no stopping Archaon. There's no way to stop Archaon. There's no chance unless you genuinely screw up and play to the worst possible level to stop Archaon. Other legendary lords of chaos may have their own issues, actually. Like if we look at the legendary lords, Kholek has the problem where he's very close to Grimgor and may end up likely in a war with him, like as I imagine has happened here, and he has to take over Cafe. So he does have a good number of dark fortresses, though they are a bit out of the way, and he does have to fight the factions for them. And this one, the one that starts here, Village, is actually a major faction, but you can do that. Like I played the Kholek campaign, it was a steamroll, but he does have to put some effort. Azazel, yeah, he's gonna have to fight Kislev. Although keep in mind what's going on here. Just from my own vision, Clan Molder is on a rampage. Kislev is pretty much gonna be wiped out already, and that's before I arrive. When I get here, I'm just gonna strike directly as Azazel, make him a vassal, and see where we go from there. Likely make him a vassal and see where we go from there, and keep Clan Molder as allies. Maybe vassalize Throgg, and vassalize Wulfric. Like those are decisions. Those are decisions I do have. And then already the tide of death is descending on the Empire. Kislev is more or less finished at this stage, or by the actions of the AI. Like Kislev's fight here is already hard enough without Archaon. You join this fray, you steamroll over Kislev, or what remains of it by the time you arrive, if there is anything that remains of it. Like Clan Molder here is just likely going to steamroll over them easily, though Catherine does have 2 stacks of troops, so she's not necessarily going to fall so very easily. But she does have Throgg and Frot and Azazel all aiming at her, so she is going to certainly have issues. And you just keep going and going and going. And your victory condition for quick victory is to take all of the Skull Road and deal with Ice Court. So I'm likely going to end up in a war with Grimgor for the sake of the Skull Road. And after that, well, the world is mine to take. You just need to for the long victory, you need to take Cafe. Okay, that's a long way. The Ulfuan, that is bullshit, I admit. But that is gonna be an enormously long way. So a long campaign is long. Although you could be tempted, if we look at the map, you could be tempted to just say, yeah, fuck it, okay, fair enough. You want me to take Ulfuan and just send like 2 stacks of troops on a mission, on an unstoppable mission where they just go directly to Ulfuan, or maybe stop in Nuln, make a Dark Fortress there, get their replenishment, and then go on sea and purge the Elves from Ulfuan. That could also be an option over there. But yeah, right now the Warriors of Chaos are incredibly powerful, and Archaon is the best representation of this. Hope you all enjoyed this. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications. If you do enjoy the content on this channel, consider supporting me via PayPal or Patreon, or for YouTube channel membership. Could certainly appreciate any and all donations at this time. Stay tuned for more.